Jolene Riessen finds herself talking about something very personal these days: the death of her husband, David, back in 2019. David died of cancer, but she does not blame pesticides that they used on their Northwest Iowa farm, and she doesn't want others to blame pesticides unless and until there is verifiable scientific proof that they pose a danger. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Jolene misses her husband of 32 years. Obviously, she did not expect to lose him to cancer when he was only 61. But she now finds herself as an outspoken defender of the pesticides that her family and many others use on the farm. We're going to get into why she feels so strongly about this and why she is going public with this. But first, Jolene tells us a little bit about the farm that she and David built. Let's first talk about your life. What's life like on the farm and how'd you get here?
I would say hectic for life on the farm. Just got done trying to get hay up, and it was kind of a struggle this week.
And you're trying to beat the rain this week.
Yeah, and you know what? Just made it by the hair of my chinny chin chin. So it's all good. But daily life includes I farm with my two boys. I lost my first husband to cancer, and so it's myself and the boys that do the farming. We have two hired hands that help us out. Besides, we have cattle. I have a custom feed yard here that I background feeders. My boys manage a custom finishing yard for a neighbor. So there is, if you can't find something to do, you're not looking, kind of thing at our house. So we also farm a fair amount of acres, a little over 2,000 acres. That is hay, corn, soybeans, and alfalfa.
And how far back do you go? How'd you get into this?
I was born and raised on a farm. So I come from a family of six. My dad actually still farms. We just celebrated his 90th birthday. So I am very hopeful. And I told my boys already, I said, this mom is probably going to be out there at 90 years old. So just be ready. So, but anyway, yeah, grew up over in Eastern Iowa. Went to Iowa State, got my degree in animal science. Took a job actually in ag chem, came out in 78 when nobody wanted any ag type people coming out into the job force. And I was lucky. I got done in 3.5 years. I was just ready to be done with school and came out with a job where a lot of my friends that went the whole 4 years did not end up with a job. So ended up in ag chem, got moved to Minot, North Dakota. From there, in Ranasils territory up there, selling ag chem, and that was super interesting to learn, farming up there in that neck of the woods. And I still chuckle one of the businesses that I called on, and they grew corn up there, and my friend, we were not far from the Canadian border. They were thrilled with 125 bushel corn, and I was thinking that was a catastrophe back from where I came from. But
it's all perspective.
Right, exactly. But anyway, so from there, moved to Sioux Falls, from Sioux Falls to Storm Lake, got married, and have been on the farm ever since.
And your husband, he also was a farm kid?
Yes, my husband, born and raised on the farm. Farm, jeepers. We got married in 86. So farm with him for 43 years before we lost him to cancer. So it just one of those things, I don't know how many people that haven't been touched by somebody, with cancer. And unfortunately, I lost my husband to that, but he's here in spirit. Trust me. I just chuckle some of the things that happen. I'm like, oh, wow, if your dad would be around, kind of thing. So he's always with us. And that was part of his legacy to lead the farm to me and the kids, and that's, so far that's what's happening. So
I don't want to get too personal on you, but how do you, when you go through something like that, and that is That's not only your life partner, but that's your business partner.
Right,
And
right.
you both are not working at a bank, working 9 to 5 with holidays off,
No,
right? I
right.
mean, it's a 7 day a week thing for 40 plus years.
Yep.
How do you pivot when you're mourning your partner, but you still now have to figure out how to keep the family operations going?
Well, and for me, I was very heavily involved in the whole operation. So it was, I did have one person ask me, so Jolene, what are you going to do? And I'm thinking, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, and lucky for me that, the boys were old enough, they were in their 20s. We made them go to college because I was like, I need for you to bring something back to the farm. I said, you
Yeah.
can't just come and farm. I said, it's not that way anymore. You have to, and then too, so if something does happen on the farm, you have something to fall back on. So anyway, I can remember being up in Mayo, and and um, my husband going through his first surgery, and it was during planting time. And luckily, the David had made the boys, run the planter and stuff. And I told him before we left to go to Mayo, I said, hey, I said, I don't care how you get it planted. I say, you just get it planted. And
Hmm.
at that time, I ran the combine, so, and I said, and I'll figure out how to get it harvested. So, and we did. You just know what you have to do. And for me, knowing where my husband is now, and I have no doubts he's in heaven, is just is so comforting to me. And I know he looks down and probably shakes his head at what some of the stuff we're doing. But
Maybe in a good way sometimes, though, too.
oh, and he has to laugh. I tell you what, there's just sometimes I laugh. I'm just like, oh my God, you can't make this up, kind of thing. So anyway, so I knew, um, and then lucky for us, or for me anyway. So when my husband was diagnosed, that we had 10 months. And so you get ready,
Hmm.
for that. And it would have been so much tougher had he, passed of a heart attack, or,
Sure.
just all of a sudden, boom, gone. And I feel for those husbands, wives, parents, when you lose a loved one that suddenly, you don't have time to prepare. So I had time to prepare, and, and David and I had talked a lot, and like I say, I mean, the right hand man, I guess,
Hmm.
for lack of better words. So, I knew what we had to do, and just pretty much picked up and continued on. It was just, you, I don't know. You have that farming mentality. You know what you have to do, and you just go and do it. And you mourn the loss, but he's, like I say, he's never really gone.
Yeah.
So
Will you share a story you told me before you started recording about how you teach the boys the value of money, and when they want a big old expensive piece of machinery, how mom explains to them whether mom's check is going to pay for this piece?
well, so they they actually, the boys came to me the other day, and true story, we had a windrower that we'd been struggling with. It just wasn't, it had been through several seasons of haymaking, and I knew too, it was, eventually it was going to start costing a lot of money to upkeep on it. And
Sure.
so they had, implement guy from in town came out, and was wanting to sell him this windrower. And the boys come, mom, mom, mom. And I'm like, okay. I said, so first of all, I said, how much is it going to cost?
Hmm.
And I said, so, and they, and they told me the price, and I was like, oh, he said, okay. And I didn't tell you this. I'm like, okay, so what are they going to give me for my windrower? And they told me the price, and I was like, yeah, that might be pretty fair. And
Okay.
so anyway, and then I'm like, so what? I said, so what good is this going to do us? And the boy's like, Mom, we're not going to have to fix on that old one anymore. So I'm like, okay, that's fair enough. And I said, so, and what's the benefit here? And the boys are like, Mom, we'll get the hay down so much faster and it's going to dry faster and all this. And I'm like, okay, I said, see what you can do. So anyway, and they ended up, I'm working towards retirement. And so I really, stubborn about having to buy any more equipment. And I told him, I said, all right, I said, this is on you. I said, you can trade mine in. I said, that is my,
Contribution.
yeah, that is my contribution to the cause here. And I said, and then we didn't even have it for a few hours and we already he broke it once and then
Oh
he totally
gosh.
broke it again. So, and I'm questioning what kind of windrower we bought, but the neat thing was, so this implement dealer in town specifically came out to the boys because he knew that they were, young farmers and going to be continuing in the business. And so this salesman went back to his boss and said, hey, I want to sell the Reasons this, and the guys, and he was getting some pushback from the boss. Why are you working so hard to try and get this account? And his answer was, these boys are going to be out here for a long time. They're going to need equipment for a lot of years. And he goes, I want to be the place that they come and buy it.
Oh, nice.
That was really cool. I'm like, that was pretty neat. So, but but he is right. There's not a lot of young farmers out here anymore. And for us, the livestock part of it, there's even fewer
Mm-hmm.
of those people out here. So
So what do you do to, I know it's very important for you and your late husband to that the boys stay in this and keep this going. What do you do to make sure that they have that foundation underneath them so that they can survive? Now, you're already bringing really good genes to this, apparently, since you said your dad's still farming, so you may be out there till you're 100 anyway, but mentoring for a long, long time. But what are you doing with them other than the financial lessons to make sure they have that stability so they can keep this going for generations to come?
well, I think just the mentality, try and do more with less. I've seen, I mean, I guess I was already seeing as corn price was going down and margins were getting tighter.
Mhm.
I'm like, I said, we need to tighten up. They said, we don't need to spend any money. In fact, that, so the windrower is kind of a gift because I told them, I said, this year, I said, no equipment, there's just, we just need to, get things paid off at the bank and continue to carry on, but and to try and be profitable because
Mhm.
the margins are incredibly tight. But that and that and just having that work ethic, to which they've come a long way since college, as every kid does. But the willingness to put in the hours and knowing what needs to be done and not having to be told what needs to be done. So for me, I kind of enjoy sitting back, and then it's like I'm thinking, okay, so hopefully you're, and boom, they're doing
Mhm.
it. So I'm winning with that. So but and then for me, um, I know, had my late husband still been alive, and this is no different than any other, kids coming back to the farm, wanting to take the farm over, and dad's
Mhm.
still in control. Um, I told the boys after my husband passed, I'm like, because back then it was a lot of, well, that's yours and this is mine.
Mhm.
And I told him, I said, you know what? I said, from now on, I said, it's all of ours. And I said, if one is doing well, everyone is doing well. And I said, and if you want to go someplace, I said, just make sure all the work is done. And I said, or if not, I said, have somebody lined up to be able to do that, because then we can all enjoy and not be stressing about, oh, you're gone. And that was one thing too, with my late husband, is we just didn't go on vacation. It was
Yeah.
always farm, farm, farm. And it was, and for him it was, oh, we'll do that stuff when I retire. And I'm
Mm,
like, well, look where that got me.
yeah.
So I encourage them, and to me, that there's got to be that balance between family
Mhm.
and working. Had it been up to my husband, my late husband, they've been working all the time.
Yeah.
But as a mom, I understand, you know what, there's family time. You got to spend time with their family, and too, it just, you'll never get that time back.
Right.
So, and to have that, and then to instill in the boys the love of the farm. Um, I guess it just happens. I just know for me, I always knew I was going to marry a farmer and be back on the farm, and ta-da, that's where I ended up.
There it
And
was.
and the boys were, um, I told them ever since kindergarten, that they were going to go away before they were going to come back to the farm. And oh wow, did I get pushed back on that one? No, mom. And I'm like, well, then if you don't want to do that, I said, then you're going to go get a job. And they look at me. I said, because then you learn to work with other people. I said, and I said, farming, granted, you're pretty much working with the same people, but you got to learn to work with other people, understand other people's, thoughts,
Hmm.
and how to work with them. And I said, you're going to have landlords, that you may not like all of them, but you need to figure out how to work with them.
Hmm.
And I said, and then, when you come back to the farm, it's because you want to, not because you have to. So my husband, was an only boy of the family, so he did not get a chance to go away to
Yeah.
school, and he regretted that.
Hmm.
He always wanted that opportunity, and he just couldn't, because he was the workforce at the farm. And so we made a conscious effort to make sure that the boys had an opportunity to go and do that. Granted, it was at that time, jeepers, when they were going to school, we were up to about 4,000 acres. So it was, yeah, that part was hard. I
Yeah.
mean, just go time all the time. And the
Hmm.
boys would be, home on the weekend and stuff to help out, but that didn't kind of cover during the week. But
Oh, sure.
you know what, you didn't know any better. And so you
Yeah.
just, yep, we got to go. We
Yeah.
got
Can you,
things. Yeah.
you talked about all the things you're doing, and I don't want to get too personal here, but because of how hard it is with corn in particular, is that why you have your overall setup the way you do to minimize that pressure a little bit so that your whole future is not dependent on those super slim margins with corn?
Right. So for me, I would rather walk the corn off the farm than to basically, and I do sell some grain because we can't feed it all.
Hmm.
But I would just as soon walk it off the farm. And I think as margins continue to stay tight, I think that's where the money is going to be made, is in the livestock operation part of it. So and luckily my boys, they love their cattle. They really
Hmm.
do. So, and they also have a cow calf herd, besides. So from the small to the big.
Yeah. And it looks like maybe things are kind of looking up a little bit on that side of things
Well,
too.
we're hoping so
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
but you know,
And I appreciate you being willing to talk about this. I know we're talking about some stuff that can be pretty sad when you're talking about your late husband. You made the decision to do an op-ed piece in
yes.
a newspaper in Iowa in the Des Moines Register talking about pesticides. And for all of our friends here listening beyond the borders of Iowa, the state legislature, again, that like they had done the last couple of years, had debated an idea about adding some additional protections for pesticide makers, especially when it comes to glyphosate. Um, as Bayer has dealt with some class action suits from folks who believe that they have been sickened from the product. You have you chose to write this op-ed to talk about your husband and talk about how he battled through cancer, but also how that doesn't make you kind of fearful of the use of pesticides. Can you explain why you decided to do that?
Well, first of all, the Maha, Make America Healthy Again,
Hmm.
and yeah, do we got some work to do there? Absolutely. But for me, when you called out pesticide use as, one of the problems, well, that, to be honest with you, it pissed me off. So just for lack of better words.
Hmm.
And to say this is the reason why things are they are as they are. And having gone through what I did with my husband, I'm like, no, you can't, you cannot pin it on that because, and here is why I'm so passionate about this. I was out there shoulder to shoulder with my husband. We were using the pesticides, there was many times that I would help him load the sprayer. So I was, if you're wanting to put it on that, why health issues and stuff. And then, and so then, and we use the PPE, personal protection,
Mhm.
protective equipment, gloves, goggles, all that good stuff. Um, so then why did he end up getting sick and I did not? And I have a brother who's a research scientist. He at one time worked for Bayer. I have a sister-in-law who's a pediatric oncologist, and I'm asking them why.
Mhm.
And they can't come up with the answers either because sometimes some sicknesses it is a multitude of things and there's nothing you can really point at. So for him to single out pesticides in my book was wrong. Um, I look at the lifestyle of kids, very very sedentary. I look at the food, the processed food that we
Mhm.
eat, that we never had growing up,
Mhm.
kind of stuff, and I'm like, whoa. So I think some of the points that is made there with that Maha report, I think they need to pursue further. But when I look at the pesticide part of it, there's nothing that has been more studied than pesticides. Pesticide, I mean, so herbicides, insecticides, fungicides are probably more studied and more tested than what some pharmaceutical products are. So, and for me as a farmer, I have to go with the science. That's what my EPA is for. That's what is FDA for. And they set standards as to what is, if you're looking at parts per million or whatever, they're the ones that set that standard, not me. I go by their guidelines and I go by the science. And I have, and I truly am a believer in the science. I'm not a scientist, but I believe in what they do, and I believe that they're out there, in the best interest of people like me that consume. And as a farmer, I am not going to use a product that I think could harm somebody. That is not the farmer way. That is, farmers just don't do that. We produce food. We produce a safe, wholesome, nutritious food for the world to consume. We are the envy of the world. I've done quite a bit of traveling, and I've seen some of the way that food is grown elsewhere in the world. Wow, we are in a sweet spot, and and with the products that we have, we are able to do that. So if you're going to pull pesticides from us, um, then I would say, consumer, you need to find a really good job because the price of food's going to go up and food will probably be scarce because those pesticides help us to grow the food in quantities that we do to feed the world.
When your husband got sick, did it go through your mind about could it have been anything you ever used on the farm? Or were you so comfortable that that did not go through your mind?
Oh, you know what? You think of everything. You just do. Um, and as I was, visiting with my brother and sister-in-law, it's like, Jolene, it can be it can be genetic. It can be anything that triggers that. And they could not pinpoint, well, I think, as we talk about cancer, we understand things like asbestos
Hmm.
and, MTBE and, that kind of stuff. But yet, when they look at glyphosate, when they look at atrazine, they every 7 years, all those chemicals or herbicides, pesticides get looked at again and reevaluated to make sure that the safety is there and that the way that we're using it is safe. And okay, atrazine, my dad used to use atrazine when he was farming. That's been a long,
Hmm.
long time and ago. And you know what? And we still use atrazine. And so then let's look at glyphosate. Look how long we've had that product out here in the field. And you know, and for me, if I'm able to use those two products, I can do conservation tillage. I can keep my soil on my ground because I'm not tilling it. So, which if you want to, you know, if you want to look down the road there farther, makes for cleaner water, helps me get rid of that epoxy zone down there in the Gulf of Mexico. Um, to be honest with you, I hate sharing my soil with anybody.
Hmm.
It's part of my farm. It's part of my productivity. I don't share well with that, and I like to keep it on my ground. And so anything I can do to do that, that's what I'm doing. And know that I'm not alone. That there are many other farmers that have the same mentality that you know, I'm going to do everything I can to keep my soil on my ground and help to, you know, make sure that our water is in good shape.
So how do you think people should talk about this? How do you want to talk about this going forward? Maha is obviously a prominent matter, and clearly there are, while we may have a bunch of uncertainties, we may have disagreements about what's causing what, we have too many people sick, and we have too many people who probably need to eat different stuff,
Mhm.
whatever the reason, right? And some of it is self-induced. You know, when we start looking at cancer, you mentioned asbestos. I had a cousin who worked with asbestos, removing it in schools. He ended up getting sick. He got cancer. He passed away. My dad started smoking when he was 11 years old. He smoked for 60 years. He tried a couple times to quit, and he did a couple of times, always went back to it, and that's what got him.
Mhm.
And you know, we've had tons of research on smoking, and if you smoke out there, God bless you. Hopefully you don't get sick, and it is an awful thing to watch somebody battle through that and eventually pass away from that. So we've had
Right.
research that on those two things, we know that stuff's bad. When it comes to pesticide, you talked about the research that's gone into it. So how do we make sure the stuff we're using is safe, because it has proven valuable to productivity, which is also instrumental. So how do we find that balance?
Well, you know, and for me, I have to go back to the science. It's like, so they say I can use this amount.
Hmm.
And as a farmer, that's the amount I'm going to use. And oh, by the way, am I going to put an extra little glug in there? No, because pesticides are not cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, and as soon as you start, and I just, you know, basically you're going off label. As soon as you start going off label, things don't go well. You know, that so if you're not putting enough product out there, so now you got to go spray again because the first time it didn't kill all the weeds.
Hmm.
So you know, if you're following the label, you're following the science, and truly that's what I have to go back to because they're the ones that know. They're the ones that are setting these standards out here, for not only me as a farmer, but you know, for residue levels that their research has said is tolerable, that does not show harm to livestock, to people, to the ground. So that's, I mean, I didn't know what else to tell you there.
Yeah.
And to have that argument, you know, organic versus conventional. I'm like, you know, if you want to go organic, you do you. I just, for me, I was in Africa last year. I saw what, you know, basically those people don't have um, pesticides or whatever to help them raise their crops. They're struggling. You know, as I can use pesticides, as I can use GMOs, we just came through a tremendous drought, you know, this
Hmm.
past few years. And yet we were still able to produce food, produce corn, beans at levels that I'm like, wow, I can't believe my plant just produced that. And that all came back to the GMO. And there's a drought tolerant trait, especially in corn. Beans are pretty, when it comes to drought, beans don't mind that. So, you know, and had we not had that, we'd have been a world of hurt. And when the farm economy is struggling and having problems, so goes the rest of the economy, especially here in the United States, because the biggest thing that we trade is farm goods. So it just, I don't know, stair steps itself. So, but I just know, for me, I have to go back to the science. It's like, when they start telling me something different, I will listen. I mean, that's just what we do. But so we basically had the same pesticides now for many years. It is basically unheard of to come up with a new herbicide, new pesticide for us to use out here in the world. I mean, the compounds that are used just get mixed differently. I mean, there's nothing new that has come out. We're using the same stuff, only in different combinations and at different levels. All ran through the EPA before we can use it here on the farm.
Yeah. Well, Jolene, thank you for sharing your family story. We appreciate it, and thanks for the thoughtful conversation.
Well, very good. Always here to answer questions. That is one thing on the farm. Just, I've got nothing to hide, and I'm no different than any other farmer. If you got questions, you got concerns, you reach out. And there's lots of organizations out there. I work with Iowa Corn. There's pork, there's beef, there's soybeans. Reach out. If you have questions, send them an email. I don't understand this. Can you help me? Make a phone call. Don't be in the dark. That you don't know what you don't know. And there's, I've heard that many times before, there's no dumb questions if it's something that's concerning you. So hopefully I've helped your listeners to be a little more at ease with pesticides, and know that we're doing all we can to produce a safe and wholesome food source for people in the United States and the world.
Our thanks to Jolene. Obviously, this is not an easy thing to talk about, and we realize that there are others who may strongly disagree and are concerned about pesticide use. If you are a regular listener of this podcast, you know that we share many opinions about many issues. We also do that in our weekly American Farmland Owner newsletter. We feature a variety of thought leaders, opportunities, and challenges for farmland owners, investors, and the ag curious. We hope you will check it out. It's free, comes out every week on Fridays. Find it at AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for listening here on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmers.